Welcome to Healthy Mind Science, a show dedicated to translating youth and young adult mental health research into the real world. We have conversations with experts in psychology, neuroscience, human development, computer science, education, and more, with a focus on helping parents and educators take research findings into their everyday lives to ultimately better support our young people. Healthy Mind Science is an affiliate of the Center for Healthy Mind and Mood, an interdisciplinary research center at University of Colorado Boulder, on a mission to promote emotional resilience and healthy mood in every young person. I'm your host, Alicia, and today I have with me Dr. Ambra Coccaro. And Ambra is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Colorado Boulder and in the Institute of Cognitive Sciences, as well as in the Research on Affective Disorders and Development Lab. And we are so excited to have you on for a fresh study that was just published in the past couple of months. And it is a really important study, so we're really excited to dive in. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and your area of research?
Sure. I study mood disorders in teenagers and young adults. In other words, I'm investigating how emotional symptoms arise during adolescence when the brain is actively reorganize itself. And I'm especially interested in how brain networks grow and change during this particular phase of development, and how these changes can either protect or put at risk young person to mood disorder specifically, such as major depressive disorder. What mainly fascinates me is that teenage years are a time when the brain is incredibly active and flexible, and the skills that help young people plan and stay organized, manage emotions, stay motivated are still developing. But at the same time, teens are taking on more challenges, more responsibilities, and they have a lot of social pressure. And that combination of a brain in transition plus a work that's becoming more demanding makes this a crucial moment to understand. So overall, I'm trying to connect these two pieces, so how the growing brain shape emotional health and how we can spot early signs of resilience and risk for mood disorders. Ultimately, the goal is to support young people before major problems appear, and possibly being able to give families and educators tools that are grounded in science.
I love that. That's exactly what we're trying to do with this podcast and in our work at the center. What kind of initially sparked your interest in this area of research and in becoming a neuroscientist? How did you even get connected to this work?
So I have a few stories about that. As an undergrad, for sure, I started exploring every branches of psychology that I could have access to. So I was initially interested in social psychology, actually. And I still remember being astonished after hearing about this very classic experiment that is called the line judgment experiment. And that's like the one where people were clearly giving wrong answer simply because everyone else in the room as a group was given it. So I remember thinking like our thoughts and decisions are so much more influenced by others than we realize. And it sort of like opened my eyes to how complex and surprising human behavior can be. Then near
It's
the end of
fascinating, isn't it?
yeah, I was shocked, just like having a group that is around you that is giving a clearly wrong answer is going to pressure you to give that wrong answer just to, adhere to the group rule, sort of. But near the end of my undergraduate program, I took a neuroscience course, and that changed everything. I realized, for instance, like this whole new layer of complexity that is the biological substrate that makes thoughts, emotions, and decision possible. I then decided to spend some time in another university in Spain, where I took another course in cognitive neuroscience. And that's, I think, was the first time where I heard about this blueprint project, which aims to map the brain's major circuits. And what struck me, it was that how much we still don't know about the brain. And we have this incredibly powerful organ that shapes everything we do. And yet there are so many questions that are still unanswered. And that makes like the mystery and the possibility that sense of mystery and possibility that really stay with me. So as I learned more about the brain, I became also fascinated by the fact that the brain is not a finished product. It keeps reshaping itself through childhood and adolescence, but even through adulthood. And what I found particularly interesting is that the way people think, feel, and respond to the world isn't fixed. So it's constantly being built. And the idea that experiences, relationship, challenges can shape the developing brain circuits for better or for worse drove me deeply into developmental science. I love this idea that if we understand these sensitive periods, we can actually help steer development towards healthier outcome. So when I started my graduate training, I wanted to bring all these interests together. So the behavioral side of psychology, the brain-based perspective of neuroscience, and the developmental lens. And that's how I ended up studying how cognitive and brain development relates to mental health in young people. It feels like the place where all my early curiosity finally came together.
That's so good. And if you're a young person listening to this, or even anybody else, right? Like, I think, like, our paths kind of come together eventually, hopefully, but I love when that happens, when all of these kind of aspects that we're kind of interested in learning about or understanding, when they can all merge into like a research study or a research agenda. It's magical to experience as a person. So it's really cool that you're in your kind of element in this work. So thank you so much for sharing. So we can dive into the article that you recently published, which is really exciting, and it's called Neurocognitive Biotypes of Risk and Resilience for Mood Disorders in Adolescence: Insights from Behavioral and Graph Theoretic Network Markers. And this, I'll just shout out the co-authors. So this is with Zue Chang, Luca Ruzic, Amelia Moser, Jenna Jones, Elena Peterson, Elisa Stern, Naomi Friedman, and Rosie Kaiser. This was published in Biological Psychiatry, and we will link that also in the show notes. So if you're interested in diving into this deeper, you can feel free. We're going to talk a lot about, I think, some complex topics that I am also not a neuroscientist, and so I have lots of questions and want to dive deeper into some of these complex topics that you address in the study. So as you're talking, I might be asking some follow-up questions, but just know that I'm just trying to understand along with our listeners as well. So thanks for being patient with me. So why don't you talk broadly about the study kind of background and how it came about?
So this study followed 146 adolescent and young adults through a protocol that lasted 2 years. About 2/3 of them had a close family member with a mood disorder, so they were considered at higher risk of developing a mood disorder. The team focused on mainly 2 domains of interest. So we gather information on executive function and reward sensitivity. And now I'm going to explain more about what they mean.
Well,
Yes.
before you dive into that, when we talk about mood disorders, what does that also mean?
So mood disorder is a broader category for symptomatologies that are associated with major depressive disorder, which one of the main symptoms is called anhedonia, which is the loss of interest on rewarding situations. Whereas there is also another category of symptoms that is called bipolar, that is referring to the bipolar syndromes, that is connecting both depressive symptoms like anhedonia, but also mania, which is this sense of grandiosity, higher energy. So it's a sort of like alternation between these two types of symptomatologies.
So you're including that in the study, basically. Okay.
Yes, we are mainly looking at these two symptoms, which are called anhedonia and mania.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks for explaining. So I think you were going to go into maybe a couple terminologies, however you want
Exactly.
to approach that, and then I'll ask some follow-up questions.
Okay. So executive functions is referring to the manager's skills. Things like staying focused, planning ahead, switching between tasks, and keeping track of information. For instance, a teen is using executive functions when they are organizing homework, remembering steps in a math problem, or trying to resist the urge of checking their phone during class. Reward sensitivity is how strongly someone is reacting to things that feel rewarding and motivating. For example, some teens can get a strong boost from earning points in a game, while others barely react. It's sort of like the reward does not light them up as much. And this is what we call reward sensitivity. We collected two kinds of information at the beginning of the study. One, it was about tasks that were measuring executive function and reward sensitivity. The second kind of information was about the brain through some brain scans that were measuring how different brain regions communicate to each other during those tasks. Then the researcher were checking in with participants for a 2-year period to track their mood, symptoms, and life stress. And the goal was to see whether the combination of these two different measures of behavior and brain communication patterns could identify participants who were likely to stay well, therefore showing resilience, and the ones that were more likely to show mood symptoms later on. And when we talk about resilience, we think about the ability to cope with challenges and bounce back from stress. So, resilience isn't about never struggling, it's more about adapting, learning, and gradually becoming stronger through these challenges.
Yeah, my thought here, so many of us want our young people to be resilient and to experience and to have skills of resilience and to be resilient. So I think it's so relevant to the world where we're at, and what we're trying to work towards is, parents and educators to support young people. It's like, yeah, how do we help build resilience? How do we support resilience? So I think it's super relevant and timely. How does resilience connect with reward sensitivity and executive function?
So the idea is that these two domains are very linked to mood symptoms. And our idea is that does the combination of these executive function, stress, reward responses, and brain communication patterns, can this combination explain why some teens are going to develop mood symptoms while others are more protected even when facing similar challenges? In other words, are there like recognizable patterns of strength and vulnerabilities that relate to risk and resilience for mood disorder in young individuals?
So we're kind of looking at the outcome is either folks who are resilient or at risk for depression or bipolar.
Yes, it's like what makes this individual more at risk or more resilient to developing mood symptoms later on.
Okay, so I know stress was a factor as well. What are you trying to understand related to stress with all of these components?
We know that stress is a sort of like accelerating certain processes. And as I was saying before, this developmental phase is a very particular one because you are still developing, but you are facing for the first time a lot of stressor from the society in general, from parents, from the school, socially speaking too, because you're starting creating the first connections in your life. So we know that stress plays an important role, and we know that there are certain features that would make a person prone more prone to react to stress by developing symptoms, not just specifically to mood disorder, but more in general. And we also know that, for instance, executive functions are particularly linked to the way individuals are coping with stress. And we know that these two together could actually be important predictor of mental outcome. And that's why we decided to understand not only if these domains of interest were able to predict the development of mood symptoms, but also how stress could impact this relationship. Are there specific characteristics that are making these individuals more prone to develop mood symptoms?
So, what else should we know about the study before kind of diving into the results?
I think one important concept is that we didn't want it to look at just one piece of information separately, the brain or the behavior, but we were looking for this sort of like natural grouping that is we sort of like fit into this algorithm all this information about the brain and the behavioral correlates of executive function and reward sensitivity. And we were asking, are there natural grouping that are based on shared or similar patterns of brain and behavioral features? So think of it like sorting students into groups based on a mix of habits and classroom behaviors, and using this information to predict their grades. So those groups are the biotypes that we are trying to create by looking at these behavioral and neural features related to executive function and reward sensitivity. And the grades are the symptoms that we are trying to predict. And plus also whether life stress made any difference in this relationship.
Okay. I love that you're making the connection between the brain and behavior. I think that is a really cool approach, as opposed to just looking at behavior and what's happening, and also just looking at the brain. I mean, both of those are incredibly, you know, helpful, right? But looking at that connection and then also looking at the outcomes of risk and resilience when it comes to mental health symptoms, I just think that that's really powerful. So it's such a cool design, and excited to hear and talk more about the results. One of the questions that I had is, why does this matter? Like, if you were able to do this, what would it do for the world?
I believe that the study shows that it is what we should be looking at in a young person is a combination of strengths and struggles, instead of just focusing on the outcome. Because two kids might both be depressed, but for different underlying reasons. Like this means that it's going to change the way we're going to try to help them. So one teen could be struggling just with attention, and they may be benefit from environmental support, like a structure environment, or like trying to minimize distraction. Whereas other teens may show blunted reward sensitivity, reward response, and they may need instead activities that build positive motivation and pleasure. And this, like for these reasons, I think it's very important to focus on early signs in terms of tailoring support, which might be beneficial depending on the feature of the teens, independently of the symptoms that they are showing, because the same symptom could underline different problems.
Okay. That's super helpful. Thank you. So why don't we talk a little bit about like what you thought you would find and then also what you found. We can start there.
Well, we thought we were going to find it was three different biotypes or groups. We thought we were going to find one resilient biotype and two more biotypes. One that was resembling more a major depressive course, and a second one that was going to mimic more the bipolar kind course. So we were expecting one to show more anhedonia and the other one to show more mania, and especially in response to stress. What we actually found, it was a little bit of a different story. For sure, we found a group that had a strong resilience. They were showing this very distinctive characteristic that was a very strong executive skills, so good attention, planning, and working memory. Plus, the brain network were very well balanced in terms of patterns of communication. And this group was very resilient. They show no mood symptoms over time, and even when they experience higher life stress. Another group show weak executive function, and these adolescents show the higher level of mood symptoms independently of life stress. It was like stress; it was not affecting their response because either way they were going to respond with these mood symptoms. And then there was a third and a fourth group. What we found in these two groups, it was that there was a mix of vulnerabilities in executive function and reward sensitivity that was coupled with a very unorganized patterns of communication in the brain. So adolescents in this group were more likely to show increased mood symptoms, especially when they were also reporting more life stress. Therefore, it was like stress was interacting with their profiles and was increasing the risk of developing mood symptoms. And I think one of the key point in these findings is that these patterns were showing before symptoms appear, suggesting that the combination of this brain and behavioral measure was signaling us who was at greater risk and who seemed to be protected.
Okay, can you maybe just simplify those biotypes again? So you got the resilient biotype that was resilient even when there was stressors, resilient and not really developing mood symptoms. So then maybe can you dive into the other three a little bit deeper or maybe
Yes.
like higher level and yeah.
So the first biotype was the one with weak executive function, and what we found it was exactly the complementary but opposite patterns of result compared to the resilient biotype, which means that low levels of executive functions was resulting into developing mood symptoms independently of life stress.
So
Ex-
regardless whether their stress was high, their stress was low,
exactly.
because they had this low executive function, um, they they still were experiencing high mood symptoms.
Exactly.
Okay.
Whereas the third and the fourth group, they were showing a sort of mix of vulnerability. And the shared pattern was that there was a very unbalanced communication in brain regions of interest. And they were showing also, obviously, some behavioral deficits, not deficits, some like a lower level of behavioral, sorry, lower level of executive function and reward sensitivity. But at the same time, they were showing that they were not developing symptoms independently of life stress. It was a sort of stress reactive biotypes in which the development of symptoms was related to being exposed to life stress.
So
And
one was and one wasn't.
They both were.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Both the third and the fourth were showing this sort of like stress reactive biotype profile. And like what we thought at the speculative level, it was that probably the other commonality that was there, it was about the brain being very unbalanced in the way brain regions communicate to each other. So we thought that maybe that could be one of the processes that could underline this kind of vulnerability.
So what was like something that surprised you from the results?
I think one one surprising result was that executive functions were really driving this natural grouping approach. I was expecting, obviously, executive function to be an important variable in this equation, but I was not expecting it to drive it as much as it did. So what we saw is that strong executive function are really protective. So teens who were stronger at planning, holding information in mind, controlling attention, tended to show this very steady emotional response even when stressed. And supporting, for instance, this skill could be one important way of trying to instill more protective factors in young people. I feel like, yeah, the executive function aspect was the one that struck me the most because like of how strong this was driving our grouping approach and how important that is both in resilience and in risk.
Yeah. And then with reward sensitivity, so that was part of the equation, but maybe not as strong in developing these biotypes.
Yes, it was not as strong, but it was still very important. Also because we look at one part of reward, which is learning during reward, that has to deal also a lot with executive function. So that kind of skill
Mm,
is actually very important in terms of developing mood symptoms. Those two were the most like important features actually.
okay.
So
Okay.
there is an aspect of reward sensitivity which is very salient.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. A really interesting study. What other things did you find or did you want to share about the findings?
I think one of the most important take home messages about resilience. Resilience can be strengthened. Like focusing the study also on resilience, I think it's very important because it helps understanding which are the measurable skills and brain patterns that aligned with a better outcome. And intervention could be informed by this finding and could be able to teach to build certain executive skills that are a promising way to shift risk profiles over time. Another important aspect, I think, is that stress matters, especially for some kids. The two groups that we found they were sort of stress reacting, it was because higher life stress was linked with a much larger increase in mood symptoms compared to the other groups. And that means that stress reduction or teaching healthy stress response strategies such as coping skills or social support are especially important for some kids who show certain patterns of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it's super interesting. One of the things that's kind of coming up for me is related to stress, and I'm a parent and very new parent, age 2, but new parent and trying to think through like how do I build a resilient kid and how do I support resilience in the young people that I work with, etc. And so I love being able to be immersed in these research studies and also think about how we do this in a practical sense. So there's sort of like two areas that's coming up for me is one is we're not trying to necessarily get rid of stress, it sounds like, but it's really trying to help young people navigate stress. So thinking about like as a parent or as an educator, we're not trying to like remove the stress from our young people's lives, but it's when those stressors do emerge and do come up, it's really helping to build those young people up so that they can face those stressors and come out better on the other side. So they're building that resilience. Is that kind of...
Yes, exactly that. Because like it's not that you can prevent the kid to be exposed to stressor. They are going to be exposed at some point, even if you reduce all the stress that are around them at this age. But there will be a point in which you cannot protect them, and they should just like go through these challenges and try to develop certain tools that are going to enable them to actually cope with stress.
And then what I love about that is like the tools around executive functioning. We actually know a ton about how to develop and build executive functioning skills with young people. And it's something that I did in my career for a decade, is trying to help young people develop time management strategies and organizational skills to help them make sure that they're in planning and goal setting to really support young people and in taking the next step or figuring out what their next step is. And I think it has so much potential to be this protective factor like you were talking about. So I think it's, from a parent and an educator perspective, it's really thinking through like how do we help support young people in developing and fine-tuning their executive functioning skills in ways that make the most sense for them too. I think making it individualized is also really helpful. Like for me, when I was in school, I loved a paper planner. It was the best. I liked to write things down and my due dates and think through when things were coming up with papers and all of that. But when I worked with young people, like it would be 50-50. Some young people would love to write things down in a planner, and then 50% of them would also really like to use some kind of technology, whether it be a mobile app that's new, or Outlook or Gmail, or some of their calendar on their computer. So I think really making it individualized to them, I think. So that's kind of one thing that's coming up for me. And then the other thing is around like treatment and intervention. And so one of the things that I was thinking about whenever I was reading this article is how it could support treatment. And this is a little bit, I'm just kind of going to ask the question because I don't actually know. But one of the things that I was thinking about with this is, could we basically scan a young person's brain, kind of see what some of these connections are, like the strong connections and then maybe like weaker connections in the brain that we're observing, and then be able to build from there, like a treatment plan or an intervention plan without even knowing what the symptoms are? Like, is that like what's possible? Maybe not from this one study, but like in the future and like where we could head?
I think the idea is that we wanted to get two complementary information. One is about brain, and the other one is about behavior. So it's the combination of these two features that could possibly give us information about symptoms. And I think the really important idea in this paper is that we try to create these profiles when they started the study, when the participants started the study, but then we look at the development of symptoms later on. So this is to say, like, we know that there are certain profiles that are more likely to develop certain symptoms. And these are also the characteristic of this profile. How can we base our intervention on the characteristic of the profile and try to prevent the development of mood disorders or mood symptoms in the future? That's the overall goal. Obviously, we are not there yet. We're still trying to optimize the way we look at the brain and at the behavioral level too, so that we can try to understand what are the most salient characteristics that are going to help us build the most robust predictive model.
So really the dream would be, well, definitely doing more research in this area to get to here, but the dream would be that we would be able to take behavioral tasks or behavioral kind of measures alongside imaging to then be able to say, okay, these folks may be at higher risk for developing mood symptoms, so we can do some early intervention around executive functioning, maybe around reward learning, et cetera, that then would hopefully prevent or maybe lessen those symptoms potentially in the future.
Exactly. It's more about looking just at patterns of strengths and struggles and see which are like the thing that we could act on. What are the features that we could try to use in order to improve and to improve certain skills and to reduce the risk and the struggles that a kid is going through. And this should be based obviously on the specific needs of the young person. That's why, as you were saying, early and tailored help appears to make a real difference.
Right. And I know that's like one of the like what we're really trying to do is early prevention, early intervention, early prediction, so we can do, support the young person as soon as possible, right? So they are building that resilience and will be resilient regardless of the stressors that they experience throughout their life. So I think it's so interesting, and I think there's a lot more research here that we can dive into in the future. So excited about kind of your next steps. But just, I guess, in summary, what are the main takeaways for parents and educators who work with youth and young adults?
I would say that when we look at certain, like a combination of skills and brain communication pattern, we were able to predict individuals that stayed steady in terms of emotional well-being and who develop mood symptoms. We found this different profiles. Some teens had a strong attention and planning skill and very balanced brain network communication patterns, and these were the teens that stayed resilient, even under stress. Other instead show weaker executive function or different combination of weakness in reward processing and executive function, but also some sort of like unbalanced brain pattern communication. And those were the ones that were especially likely to develop mood symptoms, especially when life stress was very high. And I guess that the take home message for parents and teacher is it's important to know about strengths and weaknesses, because like targeting support to the specific needs of each young person is very important for us in order to look at early signs and tailor help, which makes like a very huge difference in the way we're treating person and in the outcome that we could likely expect out of it.
The other thing that's kind of coming up for me is just around stress and how, yes, it is a factor and it can worsen mood symptoms, but we can also build resilience to be a protective factor regardless of whether or not somebody experiences stress. So I think for me was a really important takeaway, and something that I'm excited to learn more about. And again, how do we continue to develop resilience? And I think, again, part of your findings was that it is related to executive functioning and reward learning and reward sensitivity. So how do we build those pieces up in a young person so that they are resilient moving forward? So yeah.
I feel like one last piece is that like the brain is so flexible that if we can actually have early intervention, we know that the brain could change as a result of it. So it's important to highlight that we are not a fixed product. We can actually change in response to different stimulation in the environment or even challenges. And that what makes us such like a brilliant organism and very intelligent organism, such that we can actually change in response to whatever is happening around us. And this is why I feel like this line of work is very important. And I was also noticing in the field that there is not much about resilience. Most of the clinical field is very focused on risk. And it's actually a very important and fine line in the study of risk, because resilience is not the absence of risk. So it's not the opposite concept. It's just something else that is described by those resources that are going to make you less likely to develop, in general, like symptoms. So I feel like focusing on this aspect of the clinical research is very important moving forward.
I love ending on that because it just gives a message of hope that our brain can change and can be responsive in a positive way, can become and develop resilience, stronger resilience, and then also just there's hope in our research, right? And the trajectory of research where we're diving into this more from the brain, from clinical psychology, etc. So, very exciting work. Very excited to have you. Thank you so much for being on, and we can't wait to hear more about what you're working on in the future.
My pleasure.